Hi, how are you? My name is Jim Duquoise. I'm the VP of Security and Networking for SeaGlass Technology, MSP located in the greater New York City area. I've worked as... Hi, how are you? My name is Jim Duquoise. I'm the VP of Security and Networking for SeaGlass Technology, MSP located in the greater New York City area. I've worked as a network engineer, desktop support, and in the most recent years, Chief Information Security Officer for a financial firm prior to working for SeaGlass Technologies. The thing that SeaGlass actually brings to the table is a deep understanding of business need and how to incorporate the IT services and security services and keep them in line with what the business needs to thrive. And SeaGlass Technology as a managed services provider provides a level of peace of mind. We provide the ability for you to understand when, where, and how your digital assets are being managed, as well as assist you in protecting them from any level of external or internal threat. Compliance is an always ever-changing thing, and on top of that, they're generally built on frameworks and standards that are there to assist you as a set of guidelines for you to get through a process. The controls that you put in place and the things that you have to actually help to manage the risk associated with the digital assets that you have are always going to be up to you as the business. This is one of the primary reasons why all compliance standards are usually based on a risk-based approach. A risk-based approach is essentially how the company views its mission and the missions that guide that business through the process of everyday work, and then get to apply or minimize the risk associated with it. It's always going to be arbitrary because businesses are always different. SeaGlass works very hard with all of our clients in order to make sure that your information technology and your security is in line with the business processes themselves. That allows you to make better risk-based decisions and risk-based judgments, and also maintain a level of compliance, or at least adhere to standards of compliance that you can then take and show, hey, here's a report that shows I am doing well within, I'm not negligent within the scope of these compliance standards. You might ask, what are some of the things that could possibly happen if I'm not in compliance, or if I'm following these standards, or if I do this and I just get pieces of paper and put them in place because this is all that anyone asks for. And there are two parts to that. One is being completely not in compliance, which is part of an industry that needs to follow a certain compliance standard, and you're found not to be in compliance. That comes down to regulatory fines, as well as being looked at in your industry as someone was not in compliant with certain base standards within the industry. That's usually not a reputational thing you want to deal with. The other side to that is actually, can actually be worse. And what could be worse is if you harbor compliance standards in a haphazard manner, which means you may go and download policies, procedures, and standards that anyone can download off the internet, put your company name across them, and say, here you go, here are my policies and procedures. During some level of an audit, or you're found to be either out of compliance with something, you go through a compliance audit, and it's found out that you do have policies and procedures in place, but you weren't following them, and you have zero proof of any level of audit associated with those policies and procedures. That means that you can now be on the hook for things like negligence, and that comes with it a whole new host of monetary problems. Having to be compliant is one thing. Maintaining a level of compliance by having good standards, by having policies that are relevant to your risk profile and relevant to your business is imperative. If you don't have those things in place during courses of audits, those are things that are going to come back and haunt you. Being fined is only a small portion of it. The legality that goes into it and the lawyers you end up paying probably cost you more. Your company's image and your company's reputation, the ability for you to obtain new clients and to maintain yourself as a social member within the peers of your industry, that means an awful lot. People buy people. And if they don't feel as though they can trust you as an industry peer or as a client or as a customer, they're not going to do business with you. In the digital age, we are in a position that there's always going to be a guy that's going to find a way to try and undercut you and do your job. If you have a formed relationship with other people, those relationships have a tendency to carry over because they come with them aspects of trust. You don't want to lose trust. You don't want to lose reputation. You don't want to be in a position to have to try and explain yourself to your peers in order to just maintain yourself within the industry that you've chosen. Not following through on what you say, which, mind you, that is exactly what policies are. When a business puts together policies for that business, those policy statements are telling people, this is what me as a company or we as a company are going to do. Policies are a critical top-down, high-level statement that is declaring to the world that this is what we're going to do. So if you have policies in place, that's great. I applaud you for putting them in place. How do you know those policies are actually adequate? How do you know, have those policies ever been pressure tested? Have you ever been called to the table on those policies and had them tested? These are vital things to do, even if you only do them once to understand the process behind doing it. You can learn from that and then fill in gaps. This is an ongoing process. It's not a one and done. Nobody starts from zero and goes to hero. This is iterative. And the slower, sometimes small little chunks make the biggest difference, but you have to start somewhere. You always want to start by pressure testing those things you have in place already, the policies you have in place, as well as the controls that are associated with them. So you might ask yourself, what are two areas or a couple of areas that we can look at and say, what, do I know if my business is performing with even just some of the basics? Two areas that we've found actually come into play, and you wouldn't think it, but it does. It happens quite often. The two that I found to be the most problematic are access controls and backup. It's not even that you wouldn't have access controls or have backup. It's whether they're actually performing adequately, whether they're being performed and put across the board. Does everyone have to follow the rules or only a couple of people? Are the rules being broken? How do you know whether these rules are being broken? Who's following the rules? Are they audited? Do you know who's logging in? How often? Are people sharing passwords, sharing logins? Things like that from an access control process. So you may demand passwords of your people, but if you're only demanding 5 letters and there's zero complexity, you may as well just have nothing there at all. And again, not condoning that, but there's a sense of uselessness that goes along with having a policy, again, with having a policy or a procedure in place and it not being followed through with, not being pressure tested, or not being adequate. Backup is another area. Backup is something that a lot of people will turn on and say, look, I have backup. I bought a backup piece of software. They turn it on, they get a backup, they walk away. Have you ever tested your backups? This is actually a huge problem. This is something that we've seen quite often. It comes down to a lesson that I learned many, many, many years ago, and unfortunately learned it the hard way. And that is, if something is not tested, it doesn't work. Period. If something is not tested, it doesn't work. You can have the best backup in the world. You could have paid the most money. You could have the best backup guy that came in and turned it on for you. If you do not test recovery of those backups, if you don't understand how long it would take you to get out of a jam by what that backup can provide, then it might as well be broken. Because when it comes time for you to actually have to use it, if it doesn't work, or you don't understand the process to make it work and recover effectively, you will be out of business for a long period of time. And you also need to understand how long will it take for me to go from here to here, and how long will I be out of business for that? If you've come to a conclusion that you cannot be out of business, your doors cannot be closed, be they digital or not, for 24 hours, but it will take you 72 to get back your critical assets, then you've already failed. Having backup is great. Having access controls are good, but not understanding how they interact and how they relate to everyone in your business and industry and within your company, and not understanding how to recover from those things, they may as well not be in place at all. One of the other areas that we find to have serious holes or serious gaps in is third-party asset management. Depending on what type of assets you actually have being utilized by a third party will depend greatly on what level of scrutiny you need to place them under. If you are a company that happens to outsource an awful lot of processes and gives access to critical data to third-party entities, it's up to you in order to perform due diligence on that data. Just because you hand off the data to somebody else, it doesn't negate your responsibility to those assets, to those digital assets. It's still up to you to maintain a level of security and scrutiny on those digital assets. For that reason, third-party asset management is a very important part of what you do. We all know what happened with Target. We all know what happened with Home Depot. You know, we don't need to go down the road of what happens when you give, you know, third-party vendors access to your systems, and it's, again, not pressure tested, not investigated, not reviewed or looked at on a regular basis. Third-party due diligence is very important. You want to make sure that you have the appropriate paperwork in place. You want to make sure that you've done some level of scrutiny. And you also want to make sure that you have some kind of a documented process in place that you can show, yes, before I invite a third-party vendor into my arena, into my business, into my industry, that I'm going to perform these things, this level of scrutiny against them. Whether it's due diligence documentation, asking them about what their practices are and having that documented and reviewed annually, or if it's downloading things such as SOC 2 reports, SOC 3 reports, or SOC 4, your SAS 16 reports, if they deal in credit card data and you're concerned about that, PCI DSS attestation reports, things of that nature. A lot of times it's signing an NDA first prior to getting your hands on that data, but it's something that you need to do. So third-party asset management is a very important thing. As long as we were referring to digital assets and asset management, which is probably hands down one of the most important things you could do as an organization, is understanding where your digital assets are and how they're being managed, right? An awful lot of what we do in a nutshell. Dealing with the cloud. An awful lot of people, especially now with COVID, we've all either had to migrate to or had to utilize more in production cloud assets. There is and should be a large concern about utilizing the cloud. The cloud is nothing more than a series of physical assets that an external provider has presented to you, the customer, segmented them off in such a way that you are able to say, this is your section of the pie. You're paying me like a tenant would pay for an apartment in a building. You're paying for this slice of pie. The more energy and resources you use within your slice of pie, the more expensive your slice of pie becomes. Because you're using it does not remove the responsibility of those digital assets from you. You cannot off-put the responsibility of personally identifiable information, your responsibility towards security, your responsibilities towards the controls, your responsibility towards understanding, even creating policies and procedures around that. What you can do is you can take advantage of what those providers have put in place for you. Understanding how to manage your digital assets in the cloud era, or a more, I guess, less physical, even more digitized area, is critical. It's extremely important to know how to do it because every vendor does it a little bit different. They're accomplishing the same goals, but understanding those controls is important, or having people to help you understand what those controls are. It becomes even more imperative to test and pressure test those controls on a regular basis. You may have a certain control that a vendor, that AWS or Azure would have put into place that you have in action that was performing admirably. But with something like an update or a migration to a different procedure or process that they put in place, it could be as simple as you've missed that email, and now there's an exposure to those assets that you wouldn't know about. Keeping on top of what those things are, the controls that are in place, understanding how those controls work to your advantage. A lot of what cloud providers have given is great insight into the data that you are managing inside of their cloud tenancy. It's up to you to take advantage of those things. Azure has a wonderful compliance environment in which you can compare your current state of existence within Azure to multiple different frameworks and standards, thereby actually making compliance a little bit easier on you to generate reports and to prove, to certain people that you're doing things correctly. The cloud doesn't need to be scary, it just needs to be understood. It's different from on-premises. You may have heard the term penetration testing. A lot of people know what a penetration, or they have an idea of what a penetration test is. Many people consider it synonymous with running a vulnerability assessment, whereas a vulnerability assessment is a technical, simple scan against your assets from a program or utilizing a program or some other scripted method in order to test to see what's available. A penetration test takes a vulnerability scan or something like that and understanding those vulnerabilities and takes it a step further. Within a penetration test, you have the ability to be able to test or pressure test the vulnerabilities to see if they are likely to be exploited in order to garner access to the network. The big difference between, say, a vulnerability scan and a penetration test would be the vulnerability scan would be something that you would run in order to test and see if certain assets or certain things are available and whether there's a possibility of any type of relatable, currently understood vulnerability to an asset that's been exposed publicly. And a penetration test takes it a lot further and actually tries to exploit that vulnerability to see what is the likelihood behind actually performing and actually exploiting that vulnerability of breaking into the environment. How would you go about understanding, how do I do this? Who's responsible for running vulnerability scans? Can I run them myself? Who do I call? Who do I talk to? Do I talk to my IT people? Do I talk to the CEO, the CIO? Who do I talk to? Who do I talk to about this? And the short answer is that you can probably speak initially to some of your IT people and reach out to them. The one thing you cannot expect is your IT or internal IT personnel to understand and be able to perform a penetration test and vulnerability scanning with you off the bat. Most of the time, people that are in IT operations, and I've done it for many years, have their hands full, and they don't necessarily specialize in these things. So you're probably not going to get the best results, even if they go out and figure out how to do it on the fly. They could probably help to assist pointing you in the right direction, but you're better off if you're utilizing any level of outsourced security personnel, probably get in touch with someone that would be able to at least steer you in the right direction in order to assist you in making a good decision for your business. You want to make sure that your investment is always going to be in line with what you actually need and what the business needs and what the requirements are associated with it. Penetration testing is essentially pressure testing your security controls and to make sure that they are at least operationally sound in their current state, as well as test to see if any level of publicly exposed assets are adequately protected. When it comes to cybersecurity policies, procedures, standards, all of these things, you might be saying, where am I going to even start? What do I need? How many of them do I need? Can I just go download them? I mean, I've Googled it and I can just go online and buy a bunch. When it comes to cybersecurity is not an IT function. Cybersecurity is a business function. Policies and procedures, in the same way you have operational policies and procedures, cybersecurity policies and procedures are what the business is stating they are going to do as it pertains to the protection of their cyber or digital assets, everything from confidentiality of that data, as well as where it's being stored, the integrity of that data, the availability of the data to those who need it, when they need it, and only how they need it. The policies are there to offer, to tell the world and to tell employees and tell clients and customers, this is how we're going to help to secure the digital assets that we've had the privilege of being handed to maintain the trust and relationship with our clients. Your policies, like your operational business policies, should always be in line with the controls and the other things that actually make your business sound. What are the working systems that are there? And when I say a system, I'm not referring to a computer system. I'm referring to a point A to point B. Someone hands you data, it takes this path, this person handles it, this application deals with it, we store it here, and when we're done with it, we destroy it. What do we do and how do we do it? For that reason, by just downloading a template or a policy that is irrelevant to your business puts you in a very bad position if there are things that you don't do, or if they're irrelevant to your industry. It doesn't work. So cybersecurity policies and procedures are things that assist you in managing your digital assets. Network security is I guess it's a hot button term. It's a phrase that gets thrown around a lot. What is network security? Oh, my network is vulnerable. What's on my network? How do I know what's going on my network? How do I know if what I send out is safe and what I get back has a level of integrity associated with it? The first place I always tell people to start is with a hearty dose of asset management. Your assets, where are they? What do they do? What are the critical parts? What are the pieces that you need to understand as far as an industry goes? What do you need to protect? What are the endpoints on my network? How many PCs do I have? How many? And especially now with COVID, it's absolute insanity. It's mayhem. People have computers at home. Companies are buying computers and just shipping them out the door to people. There's every single control that you might have had in the office is now off into the wind. You can run certain scans at any given time and see how many exposed assets there are publicly by people probably spinning up on the fly some level of cloud asset without understanding what they're doing, and a cloud provider being helpful to those people, trying to make sure they have full access to it when they're honestly exposing bad stuff. One of the things that you can do, and important stuff that you can do, is to consistently pressure test the controls that you have in place on your network. You may know you have a firewall. You may know you have some level of switches and routers or PCs, and all I know, I see a lot of blinky lights. It hums a lot in this one room I walk into, or I get this bill every month that tells me exactly how much I have to pay them, but I have zero understanding of whether this is actually working for me or not. One of the things that you can do is pressure test that environment. Launch periodically, maybe a series of safe scripting, or take a look at your firewall and look over those access control rules. Run external scans, run internal scans. Try and get a good hold over the assets that you currently have, and then protect the assets that you need. If you know where something is, you can then go about understanding the risks associated with where it is, how it moves, who handles it, and how it's destroyed. The only way to get your hands around any level of comfort on your network is to understand what's on it and what's being managed. One of the things that could also be done is look into aspects of compromise assessment, which is something that SeaGlass does offer, that can actually go a long way towards understanding not only the assets that are potentially on the network, unknowns that might be there you didn't even know were there, legacy items, but can also assist you in seeing what the data actually looks like as it exits and enters the environment, and then see and gather some bit of analysis on the type of data and the actions of that data as it traverses in and out of the environment. Just like we would pressure test policies and procedures by saying, hey, can you show me some level of documentation on this? Can you show me this? You would want to go about trying to pressure test the controls in your environment. One of the ways to do that is through penetration testing, but penetration testing can be expensive, and it's usually just a point in time. There are other methods and means of pressure testing your controls in the environment by running a series of programs against things like your firewall or those things that are supposed to be protecting you, those general controls that you have in place that you believe are protecting you. You can run programs against them to see if they're actually performing well for you. This is all part of the constant retesting. Security is not something that you check a box for. It's not something that you just do once and walk away. It's like, okay, I bought my security, score, I'm in. It is a consistent reassessment. Digital assets that are under attack, people outside that are going after them are constantly changing. They are exceedingly agile. We need to be as agile, if not more so. Pressure test your controls. Understand your assets. Know where your stuff is. Then you can go about possibly getting a little bit more rest, or at least understanding where your gaps are and where you need to prioritize. So you may not know exactly what is meant by pressure testing your environment. You know, you might think it's like, I'm going to fill up a balloon. What am I going to do? Blow up this stuff outside? Am I going to take it, throw it off a roof? I'm sure half of you probably would love to do that simply because it costs you an awful lot. No, what you're going to do is you're going to actually ask either someone in your internal environment or do a small bit of research on finding maybe a security specialist that would understand what it might be to test the environment in and of itself. Reach out to your IT department. They may have an idea of who to contact or how to go about doing the research in order to do that. Reach out to your CIO if you have one. They may understand how to do that. Or reach out to your third-party IT specialists that you may have and ask the question, how would I go about pressure testing those things to make sure that they're performing adequately? How the hell do I know? What's going on? Throwing an awful lot of stuff at you. You're probably asking, okay, so this is fantastic. I have all this great stuff that I should know about, but I have no, how am I going to, I do have a day job. How am I going to keep on top of this? Is this now going to be on my plate? And the answer is, well, yes and no. The yes part is that it's understanding that it exists and understanding that these are things that are critical to your business to function appropriately and can also be very much a competitive advantage if you do it right. Getting your hands on some of the very preliminary basic reports from these things. The majority of backup software will generate an overview, a high-level overview of whether there was a success or whether there were failures. They generally come in colors, green or red. You would know, I'm looking at these colors. You might take that and say, hey, that's red. Why is it red? Understanding your assets. It's not expected for you to go through and say, aha, I have the counts of all my machines here and stuff like that. What is expected maybe is to get told by the people that are responsible for this on a regular basis, possibly setting up some kind of a quarterly meeting with the people that are responsible for these controls and having them go through with you. These are the areas of our concerns. These are the areas that we've made some investment in. These are the areas that we've found gaps in. These are the things we're doing for it. And here is where we are currently, as well as here's where we believe that we're performing well. Your pressure testing, whoever performs that action should be able to show you on a piece of paper that says, these are the tests we ran. These are how the controls you have in place. This is how they performed, well or not well. And if not well, this is what we're doing about it. And that's it. Half an hour, tops, once a quarter, once a month, if you really want to go nuts. Sometimes things don't happen in a month. You might be disappointed, but it would be a shorter meeting. This is how I would go about handling it from the perspective of being a business owner, someone who cannot possibly spare much more of their life being concerned about this particular aspect of the business, but understanding that it is as important as your other business operations. Once again, this is Jim Duquoise. Thank you for listening. Thank you for giving me your time and attention. If you have any questions, if you'd like to reach out to me to have any other discussions, completely open, completely free. The clock doesn't start running on you. My contact information is below. Feel free to reach out anytime. Thank you.